In the dusty winds of Arizona, if one evening at sunset you came across a woman left behind in the desert, torn, bound, her breath fading, what would you do? Ride on and pretend you never saw her, or step into a path that could cost you your very life? The Arizona sun was sinking low, spilling fire across the plains, when Jonas Hale pulled his horse to a stop. Out here, silence was never a blessing. It pressed on the ears, thick and unnatural, like the land itself was holding its breath. Jonas had lived long enough in the territory to know that silence meant only one thing: trouble waiting. His hand drifted to the worn handle of his Colt as he scanned the empty trail. That's when he saw it. A wagon leaning on a shattered wheel, half buried in dust like a carcass left for vultures. Most riders would have kicked their spurs and kept moving. Broken wagons meant broken stories, none of them good, and all of them dangerous. But Jonas wasn't most riders. Something in his gut told him to look closer. He swung down from the saddle, boots grinding against the gravel, every step heavy with suspicion. At first, it looked like nothing but debris. Torn canvas, splintered wood, a few scattered belongings glinting under the dying light. But then he froze. A shape lay across the wagon bed, too still, too human. His breath caught. Slowly, carefully, he moved closer. It was a woman. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, skin rubbed raw and red. Her dress was shredded, dirt and blood staining the faded fabric. Bruises painted her arms and face, ugly reminders of cruelty. For a moment, Jonas thought she was gone, another soul claimed by the desert without witness. But then her chest lifted. A faint breath. His heart kicked hard in his ribs. He reached out, hesitating like a man touching fire, and then her eyes snapped open, hollow, frightened, glimmering with the last scraps of life. Her lips parted, and what came out was no louder than the wind itself. "Save me, please." 3 words. Fragile, broken, yet sharp enough to cut through steel. Jonas felt the weight of them slam into him, heavier than any bullet he'd ever taken. In that instant, the desert changed. The quiet trail was no longer empty. It was a crossroads, and Jonas Hale knew that if he walked away, he'd never be the same man again. Jonas Hale didn't move at first. Her words still rang inside his skull, echoing against every scar, every memory he'd buried deep. "Save me, please." A whisper that could have been mistaken for wind, yet it rattled his bones harder than a thunderclap. He pulled the knife from his belt, the blade glinting red in the sunset, and cut through the ropes biting into her wrists. The fibers fell away, leaving angry welts carved into pale skin. She flinched as if the touch of freedom burned. "Easy now," Jonas muttered, his voice rough as gravel. He poured water from his canteen, steadying her trembling hands as she drank. Her throat worked like every swallow was a war. Dust clung to her lips, and still she fought, dragging air back into lungs that had nearly given out. Minutes passed, long and heavy. Only then did she whisper again, softer, but clear enough to sear itself into Jonas's mind. "My name, Evelyn Moore." The name cut through the desert silence like a gunshot. Jonas knew it. Everyone in the territory did. Moore wasn't just another ranch name carved on a branding iron. Samuel Moore was one of the most powerful land barons in Arizona, his holdings stretching farther than a man could ride in a day. Cattle, horses, and now, if rumors were true, silver veins buried under his soil. To speak that name was to invite danger. And this broken young woman was his daughter. Jonas's jaw tightened. He'd stumbled into a storm no sane man would walk toward. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't stop. The truth came spilling out in ragged gasps, each word tearing at her throat. They took me. 3 men. Riders with eyes like wolves. They sent word to my father. Demanded a ransom. More gold than most men will ever see. Her voice cracked, but she forced it out, like a wound that had to bleed before it could heal. He refused. Said he wouldn't trade with killers. Said they'd take his gold and kill me anyway. He thought I was lost the moment they touched me. Jonas said nothing. His eyes stayed on hers, steady, anchoring her to something solid while she shook in his arms. "They dragged me across the desert," she continued, her words a rasp. "Beat me when I slowed, laughed when I begged, and when they grew tired of waiting for ransom, they planned to sell me to another man. Someone with wealth, someone who wanted me, and the land I'd inherit. Um, her fingers clenched Jonas's sleeve, knuckles white with desperation. But riders came. I don't know who, lawmen, bounty hunters, maybe just men braver than most. They chased us hard. The outlaws panicked. The wagon wheel snapped. And then they threw me aside. She choked back a sob. They called me dead weight, said the desert would finish the job. Jonas's throat burned. He'd buried men who carried fewer wounds than this girl, and here she was, still clinging to life with a will stronger than iron. He brushed her tangled hair from her face, seeing not just bruises and blood, but defiance hidden in those tired eyes. She had been broken, yes, but not destroyed. The sun slid lower, shadows stretching long across the ground. The silence of the land pressed in again. But this time Jonas knew it wasn't empty. Somewhere out there, those men were still riding. Wolves don't give up a kill so easily, and if they learned she'd survived, they'd come back angrier, hungrier, more dangerous than before. For a long moment, Jonas waited. He could ride away, leave her to the fate her father had already accepted. Walk on, as so many others had. That choice would cost him nothing. But deep down, he knew the truth. If he abandoned her, he'd never outrun the sound of her voice. Save me, please. He lifted Evelyn gently, cradling her frail body against him. She winced, but she held on, her head pressed to his chest. Jonas carried her to his horse, hoisting her carefully into the saddle before mounting behind her. One arm wrapped around her waist, steadying her as Knight, his old gelding, took the trail back toward the ranch. Every step of the ride was agony for her. He felt her body jolt with each bump, heard the sharp hiss of pain escape her lips, yet she never asked him to stop. She only whispered once, faint as smoke, "I trust you." Those 3 words sealed it. Whatever storm lay ahead, Jonas knew he'd already chosen his side. By the time they reached his ranch, twilight had drowned the plains in violet and ash. He carried her inside, laid her gently on the cot, and lit the lantern. The small flame threw shadows across the rough wooden walls. Jonas cleaned her wounds as best he could, his hands steady, though his chest was a storm. Evelyn drifted in and out of restless sleep, murmuring fragments of nightmares, chains, laughter, desert nights that refused to end. Jonas sat at her side, rifle propped against the wall, watching over her like a man who knew danger would not wait long. And he was right. Because somewhere beyond the horizon, 3 riders still hunted, and the desert night had a way of delivering wolves to any door that dared defy them. And that, folks, is where the West grips you hardest. Not with the sound of gunfire, but with the silence before it. Jonas Hale didn't go looking for trouble. Trouble found him, and now he held in his arms the spark of a war that could set the whole territory ablaze. If this story chills you the way it chilled me writing it, hit that like button, share it with someone who still believes in courage, and don't forget to subscribe. Because out here on the trail, every week, we ride straight into another tale that the Wild West refuses to let die. Jonas Hale didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark, rifle across his knees, listening to the house breathe. Outside, the desert whispered through the dry grass, coyotes howled in the distance, and the rafters creaked with every shift of the wind. But Jonas wasn't listening to the wind. He was waiting for hoofbeats. Evelyn moaned in her sleep, trapped in nightmares she couldn't shake. She whispered broken words, fragments of her ordeal, begging voices, snapping ropes, laughter echoing in the dark. Jonas's jaw hardened. Men who could do that to a woman weren't just thieves. They were predators, and predators didn't quit until blood was spilled. The first light of dawn spilled across the plains, painting the horizon in pale gold. Jonas pushed up from the chair, stretching stiff shoulders, when a sound cracked the stillness. Hoofbeats, slow, steady, deliberate. His stomach sank like a stone. He stepped onto the porch, rifle raised, eyes narrowing against the rising sun. One rider, alone. The man reined in a few yards from the house. He was lean, hard-faced, with a scar cutting down his jaw like a brand. His eyes were cold and sharp, a rattlesnake's eyes, and his grin carried the weight of violence. Jonas knew that look. This wasn't some lost traveler. This was a wolf sniffing at the door. "You've got something belongs to us," the man called, voice flat, dust roughened. Jonas didn't answer. He shifted his grip on the rifle, feet braced in the dirt. Silence stretched thin between them. tight as a hangman's rope. The scarred rider spat into the dust and swung down from his horse. He swaggered forward, hand hovering near his revolver. "You can hand her over, or I can drag her out myself." Inside, Evelyn stirred. She heard the voice, froze, then scrambled weakly from the cot, fear flashing in her eyes. Her lips trembled. "He's one of them." Jonas didn't look back. His gaze never left the man closing in. The outlaw's smile widened. "Don't play the hero, Hale. We both know heroes die quick out here." Jonas finally spoke, his tone low, steady as iron. "Turn around. Ride back. You tell the others she's not yours anymore." The man laughed, dry and humorless. "Not mine? She was ours the moment we laid hands on her. You think cutting a rope changes that?" "She's coin, Hale. Coin we're not done spending." And then it broke. The man lunged, hand snapping for his revolver. Jonas fired first. The shot cracked the morning wide open, echoing across the land. But the outlaw was fast. He ducked, the bullet grazing his shoulder, and slammed into Jonas like a bull. They crashed against the porch post, fists and boots striking hard. The rifle clattered to the ground. Jonas grabbed for the outlaw's knife hand, the blade flashing inches from his throat. Evelyn clutched the doorway, watching in terror as the two men grappled, dirt flying, wood splintering. Jonas drove his fist into the scarred man's jaw, sending him staggering. The outlaw slashed wild, the knife nicking Jonas's arm. Pain flared hot, but Jonas pushed through, catching the man's wrist, twisting until bone popped and the blade fell. He slammed the outlaw into the dirt, breath heaving. The man spat blood, rolled to his knees, and snarled. "This ain't over. You've signed your death warrant, rancher. Every last acre you own will burn for this." He staggered to his horse, clutching his shoulder, and hauled himself into the saddle. With a final glare, he rode hard into the horizon, dust boiling behind him. Jonas stood in the yard, chest rising and falling, blood dripping from his sleeve. He knew the outlaw was right. Wolves never came alone. If one had found the ranch, the rest wouldn't be far behind. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch, her face pale, eyes wide. "He'll come back," she whispered. "He'll bring the others." Jonas wiped sweat from his brow, staring into the empty horizon. "Yeah," he muttered. "And when they do, they won't be asking anymore." The two of them moved quickly. Jonas barricaded the doors, checked his ammunition, set lanterns low so shadows wouldn't give them away. Evelyn, though weak, insisted on helping, fetching bandages, handing him cartridges with trembling fingers. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Every gust of wind outside sent her eyes darting to the window. Night fell heavy. Jonas sat by the door with the rifle across his lap, lantern dimmed low. Evelyn lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, too scared to sleep. The silence between them was thick with fear and unspoken truth. Near midnight, Jonas spoke quietly, not looking her way. "We can't stay here. Not after this." "Tomorrow, we ride." Evelyn turned her head. "To where?" "Dry Creek," Jonas said. "Sheriff Harding still runs that town. Law's thin, but it's something. You'll be safer under his roof than mine." She swallowed hard, nodding. For the first time, hope flickered faintly in her eyes. Jonas leaned back against the wall, listening to the night. He knew the truth, though. By the time they reached Dry Creek, the wolves might already be on their trail. And when they came, they wouldn't just want the girl. They'd want blood. By dawn, Jonas Hale had already saddled Night. The old gelding stamped against the dirt, restless, as if he too could sense the danger pressing in from the horizon. Jonas tied down his rifle, packed what little food and water he had, and helped Evelyn mount. She moved stiffly, wincing at every shift of her weight. But her jaw was set with stubborn resolve. The ranch was no longer safe. Jonas didn't have to say it aloud. The scorched look in his eyes, the bandaged cut on his arm, and the silence between them said enough. He cast one last glance at the wooden walls that had been his shelter for years, knowing in his gut it might be the last time he saw them standing. Then he urged Night eastward, toward Dry Creek. The trail stretched wide, golden grass bending under the morning wind. For Evelyn, every mile was pain, but she clung to Jonas's arm, whispering nothing but trust. Jonas didn't answer, but he kept her steady, eyes sweeping the land for riders that might be closing in. Twice he thought he caught a flicker of movement on the ridges. Once he swore he saw dust rising in the far distance. But the prairie gave nothing away, and they pressed on. By the time Dry Creek came into view, The sun was high and merciless. The town was small, a scatter of wooden buildings, a saloon with faded paint, a blacksmith's forge, a single church steeple pointing at the sky. But the sheriff's office stood solid on the main street, and Jonas steered Knight straight for it. Sheriff Tom Harding stepped out as soon as he heard the hooves. He was broader now than the last time Jonas had seen him, hair streaked with gray, but his eyes still carried the same fire they had shared in the war. One look at Evelyn, pale and broken in the saddle, and Harding's jaw clenched tight. "Lord above, Jonas," he muttered, striding forward. "What in hell happened here?" Jonas lifted Evelyn down, his voice flat and direct. "Outlaws. 3 of them. Took her for ransom, left her for dead when things went wrong. One's already been to my ranch. The others won't be far behind." Harding swore under his breath and called for his deputies. Evelyn was carried to the doctor's office, her eyes flicking back toward Jonas, even as they led her away. He gave her a nod, a promise without words, before turning back to the sheriff. "You know them?" Harding asked. "Hard men. The kind that don't scare easy," Jonas said. "Scared one leads him. I put him in the dirt yesterday. He'll be coming back with blood in his teeth." Harding's eyes narrowed. "Then we make our stand here." Within the hour, Dry Creek was a town bracing for a storm. Harding had deputies posted along the boardwalk, rifles loaded, windows were shuttered, doors barred. The townsfolk whispered in alleys, fear thick in the air. Jonas stood outside the sheriff's office, rifle cradled in his arms, scanning the horizon. He knew what was coming. Night fell like a curtain. The town lay under a stillness so sharp it made every sound ring louder, the clink of spurs, the rattle of wind against loose shutters, the restless stamp of a horse in the livery stable. Jonas stood with Harding on the porch, both men silent, both waiting. It came just past midnight. The sound of hooves, muffled but steady. Shadows moved at the edge of town. 3 riders slipped in under cover of darkness, tying their horses behind the saloon. Jonas felt the weight of their presence before he saw them, like the air itself grew heavier. "They're here," he said quietly. Harding's shotgun clicked as he pumped it once. "Let 'em come!" The outlaws spread through the street, their silhouettes cutting across the lantern light. The scarred rider was at the front, his grin cruel, revolver loose in his hand. His eyes locked on Jonas. "You should have let her die out there, Hale," he snarled across the silence. "Would have saved you all this trouble." Jonas raised his rifle, steady, unshaken. "Come take her then." The first shot cracked through the night, exploding the quiet into chaos. Rifles thundered from the boardwalk. Windows shattered. Dry Creek roared alive with the fury of gunfire. Jonas fired from the steps of the sheriff's office, each shot precise, measured. Harding stood beside him, his shotgun booming, blasts lighting up the street. Deputies answered from the shadows, bullets sparking off barrels and walls. The outlaws fought like cornered wolves. One charged with a knife, breaking through the line, slamming into Jonas. They grappled in the dust, fists and boots, the knife flashing silver under the moon. Jonas caught the man's wrist, twisted until the blade dropped, then drove him into the ground, hard enough to rattle his teeth. Another outlaw tried to slip behind, crouching near the saloon steps. Harding's sharp eyes caught the movement. His shotgun roared, the blast sending the man sprawling, his revolver skittering across the dirt. That left the scarred rider. He squared off in the middle of the street, revolver shaking with rage, eyes blazing like wildfire. "She should have died," he hissed. "You ruined everything." He fired. The bullet tore past Jonas's shoulder, close enough to singe fabric. Jonas steadied his rifle, but before he could squeeze the trigger, Harding's deputies closed in. Boots thundered, voices shouted, and the scarred man found himself surrounded. For a moment, the night held its breath. The outlaw spat, defiant to the last. Then the shackles snapped around his wrists, cold iron clinking louder than any gunshot. The street went quiet again. Only the smell of smoke, the sting of gunpowder, and the thud of bodies in the dust remained. From the doctor's window, Evelyn had watched it all, pale, trembling, but alive, her eyes locked on Jonas through the shattered silence. And for the first time since the desert, she allowed herself to believe maybe she was safe. Jonas lowered his rifle, chest heaving, and met her gaze. No words passed between them. None were needed. But deep in his gut, he knew the West never let things end so easy. The gun smoke still hung heavy in the air when silence fell over Dry Creek. The echoes of violence lingered on the wooden boards of Main Street, where bodies sprawled lifeless in the dust. Deputies dragged the wounded away, their boots leaving red streaks across the ground. For a moment, the town breathed again, but it was the shallow breath of people who knew the danger wasn't truly gone. Jonas Hale stood in the middle of the street, chest heaving, rifle loose in his hands. His shirt was torn, blood running down his arm from the knife fight. Across the way, Sheriff Harding barked orders, his voice gruff but steady, rallying men to guard the jail, where the scarred rider now sat shackled and seething. Jonas's eyes lifted to the doctor's office window. Evelyn stood there, pale as moonlight, her face framed by flickering lamplight. Their eyes met, and in that locked gaze was everything unspoken, the horror she had survived, the storm still ahead, and the fragile thread of trust binding them together. Harding approached, his boots crunching over glass and spent shells. "You bought us a night," he said, "but don't fool yourself. Men like him don't stay caged forever. The others that ride with him, they'll hear soon enough." Jonas nodded grimly. He didn't need telling. In the West, nothing stayed finished. Blood always drew more blood. 2 days passed, and Dry Creek wore its fear like a second skin. Deputies stood double guard. The townsfolk whispered about vengeance riding down on them. Evelyn recovered slowly, the bruises fading but her spirit still raw, every creak of the door sending her heart racing. Jonas rarely left her side. He tended his wounds in silence, watching the street from the window, rifle never far from reach. On the third morning, a polished carriage rolled into town, its wheels gleaming against the dust. Samuel Moore had arrived. The land baron stepped down in a tailored coat, his boots untouched by mud, his silver watch chain glinting in the sun. Behind him trailed armed men, clean-shaven, well-fed, each carrying rifles sharper than anything Dry Creek's deputies owned. Evelyn rushed to meet her father, tears breaking free as she fell into his arms. Samuel's face softened, but only for a moment. He pulled her close, then turned to Jonas with eyes cold as steel. "I thank you," he said stiffly. "You saved what is mine." Jonas's jaw clenched at the words. He saw the way Samuel's hand lingered on his daughter's shoulder, not tender, but possessive, like a man clutching land papers. Evelyn caught it too. Her face flickered with hurt, but she stayed silent. That evening, while Samuel arranged for Evelyn's return, Jonas slipped away to the edge of town. His ranch was gone. Word had reached him that the wolves had burned it to the ground when they found it empty. The fields he had worked, the fences he had built, the home he had kept alone all those years ashes. Harding joined him by the corral, leaning on the rail. "You know you could ride out now," the sheriff said. "No one would blame you." Jonas shook his head. "Men like that don't stop. Not for money, not for blood. They'll come again. Maybe for her. Maybe for anyone who stood in their way. If I leave, I'll hear about Dry Creek burning next." Harding studied him a long moment, then nodded. "Then we stand together." But the storm came faster than either man expected. That night, as Evelyn prepared to leave with her father at first light, shadows slipped through the alleys. The scarred rider's men had arrived, not 3 this time, but more than a dozen, hardened killers with fire in their eyes. They surrounded the jail, cut down 2 deputies, and dragged their leader free before the town could muster a defense. By the time Jonas and Harding arrived, the cell was empty, the lock smashed, and the smell of blood hung in the air. Evelyn clutched Jonas's arm when she heard the news, her body trembling. "He's free," she whispered. "He'll come for me again." Jonas looked into her eyes, steady as iron. "Then he'll have to go through me." The next day, the carriage rolled out with Samuel at the reins. Evelyn inside. She looked back only once, her gaze lingering on Jonas, her lips parting as if to speak words she couldn't. The dust swallowed the wheels, leaving Jonas alone in the street, a rifle at his side, ashes at his back, and a promise burning in his chest. Because the West never gives peace to men who choose the hard road. Every step forward is bought with blood. Every act of courage carved into the dust at terrible cost. Jonas Hale had lost his home, and perhaps any chance of keeping the girl whose life he'd saved, but what he carried was something deeper. The knowledge that when fate placed him at the crossroads, he had not turned away. And maybe, just maybe, the trail between him and Evelyn Moore wasn't done. The desert had a way of tying souls together with invisible rope tighter, sometimes, than blood. And that, folks, is the truth of the Wild West. Sometimes doing right costs you everything, but it's the only way a man can still look himself in the eye. If this story struck you deep, hit that like button share it with someone who believes in courage, and make sure you subscribe because every week we saddle up and ride into another tale the desert refuses to bury. The dust of Dry Creek eventually settled, though it never truly left. Gunsmoke fades, bodies are buried, and buildings get rebuilt, but scars remain. For Jonas Hale, the scar was not just the cut on his arm or the ashes of his ranch. It was the hollow silence of knowing that doing the right thing had cost him everything he had worked for. Evelyn Moore was alive because of him. That was fact. Yet she was gone, carried away by a father who saw her as property and by a world that measured worth in acres and silver veins. Jonas didn't save her to earn gratitude or love. He saved her because the desert had forced the question into his hands. And when a man meets that kind of choice, he either steps forward or lives the rest of his life ashamed of the step he never took. The West was built on men and women who stood at those crossroads. Some walked away and survived longer, maybe even richer. Others, like Jonas, chose the harder trail. They sacrificed peace for conscience, safety for honor. The desert is littered with bones of both kinds, and history rarely remembers which lives were easier. But it always remembers which lives were true. Evelyn's whisper still echoed in Jonas's ears, long after the carriage disappeared into the horizon. "Save me, please." 3 words that had altered his entire existence. They weren't just the plea of a broken woman. They were the voice of everyone left behind by cruelty, of every soul the West had tried to bury in silence. Jonas answered her, not because it was safe, not because it promised reward, but because if he hadn't, the desert would have swallowed him too, just in a different way. A man who abandons the helpless abandons himself. The lesson of Dry Creek wasn't written in the flames of the gunfight or the ashes of Jonas's ranch. It was written in the choice that defined him. Sometimes the West doesn't reward virtue. Sometimes it punishes it, but the measure of a life isn't the land you own or the cattle you brand. It's the courage you carry when the world demands you look away. And Jonas Hale did not look away. He rode home to nothing, yet he carried more than he'd ever owned. The respect of Sheriff Harding, the trust of a woman whose spirit refused to break, and the knowledge that when fate asked him for an answer, he gave it. So what do we take from this trail? That the hardest choices will strip you bare, test every piece of who you are. That doing right might cost you your roof, your land, even the people you hope to keep close. But if you hold steady, if you meet the storm head on, you walk forward with something the West can never take. Dignity. And that out here where dust buries most men is worth more than silver, more than cattle, more than life itself.